in our headlines on this Tuesday afternoon, April 30th, here in South Korea. Findings for the month of March show industrial production and facility investment down 2.1% and almost 7% on month respectively, but retail sales up 1.6%. Meanwhile, back on Monday, President Seok-yeol and opposition party leader Lee Jae-myung agreed on the broader need for healthcare reform, but remained poles apart over other matters. And in the U.S., pro-Palestinian protests continued college campuses despite efforts by authorities to crack down on the rampant rallies, which are now also taking place at French universities. Korea witnessed mixed economic activity in the month of March, with industrial production and facility investment losing substantial ground, but retail sales maintaining their upward trend. Our An Sung-jin starts us off.
South Korea's overall industrial output for March saw an on-month decrease for the first time in 5 months, seeing the largest drop since February 2020. Data from Statistics Korea on Tuesday show that despite an upward trend in the months previous, the figure had fallen by 2.1% on month. This is largely due to a decline in investment and a base effect of relatively high industrial production growth over the past 4 months. By sector, the mining industry decreased by 3.2%, as metal processing used to make electronic parts such as LCD panels dropped. The manufacturing industry was down by 3.5%, and service output fell by 0.8%. Facility investment also saw a large drop of nearly 7% as investments in the machinery and transport sectors dropped. However, consumption has maintained modest growth. Retail sales went up by 1.6% compared to the previous months on the back of increased sales for food and beverage as well as vehicles. There's also been a steady influx of tourists. An official from the Finance Ministry notes that though concerns may arise from the drop in production, the economy is still improving.
Despite the drop in industrial output, as seen with the GDP growth, the first quarter is seeing moderate recovery with a balanced portfolio of exports and private expenditure. This would be the 5th consecutive quarter to see an increase in overall production.
In order to maintain the trend of recovery, the government pledged to do its best to stabilize prices of agricultural products and energy products, while reinforcing investment to improve people's livelihoods. Han Sung-jin, Arirang News.
In the corporate arena, Samsung Electronics saw higher than expected earnings in the first quarter of this year on the back of strong sales of semiconductors and smartphones, our Park Gun-woo reports.
South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics saw a surplus in its operating profit in the first quarter for the first time in 5 quarters. According to Samsung on Tuesday, the company's operating profit in the first quarter of this year was 6.66 trillion won, which is over $4.7 billion. That's an on-year increase of more than 931%. And that's an even larger profit than what was earned during the whole of 2023. Higher costs for DRAM and NAND flash, along with increased demand for high-value memory chips including HBM and DDR5, and strong sales of its first AI smartphone, the Galaxy S24, led to its higher-than-expected jump in profit. Revenue also rose by nearly 13% to around 71.9 trillion won, or $52.2 billion. That was also the first time in 5 quarters that sales were back above the 70 trillion won level. In detail, the Device Solution Division managing semiconductors saw an operating profit of over 1.9 trillion won, or $1.38 billion, during the first 3 months of 2023. While the division saw a yearly deficit of around 15 trillion won last year, it recorded a surplus in quarter 1 for the first time in 5 quarters. The Mobile Experience Division saw stronger sales and operating profit as well, led by the Galaxy 24 smartphone. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
And first quarter findings also show Korea's defense businesses raked in substantial revenue amid government efforts to boost related exports. Our Shin Se-byuk has the latest numbers.
Major domestic defense companies in South Korea have continued to grow in the first quarter of this year. The government has ramped up its initiative to boost the defense industry's competitiveness, with an aim to rank among the top 4 global defense powerhouses. According to a synthesis of recent market expectations by securities firms and Yonhap Infomex data, the combined first quarter revenue of the four leading companies was estimated at 4.4 trillion won, or $3.2 billion, marking an 18% on-year increase. These companies include Hanwha Aerospace, Korea Aerospace Industries, Hyundai Rotem, and LIG Next One. Despite the revenue growth, the overall first quarter operating profit for these companies fell nearly 19% on year to around $251 million. This decline was primarily due to a decrease in high-margin sales in Poland, where recent political shifts have led to a less favorable view of imported weapon systems. Among these, Hanwha Aerospace, South Korea's largest defense company, reported a significant revenue jump of over 9% year-on-year to around $1.5 billion, but saw a sharp decline of 42.5% in operating profit. This was due in part to the absence of new shipments of K9s and Cheonggung missile systems to Poland during the first 3 months of 2024. Kai, known for producing the KF-21 supersonic fighter and Fa-50 light attack aircraft, posted just over $570 million in revenue and around $29 million in operating profit for the January to March period, up 38% and 102.6% respectively from the previous year. This strong performance was driven by robust exports and steady domestic demand in the aviation and aerospace sectors. Similarly, Hyundai Rotem reported a 9.3% on-year growth in revenue and 40% in operating profits, led by its K2 tank. LIG Next One saw revenue gains from its exports to Indonesia, totaling around $200 million for the quarter. However, the project's low operating profit margin of 2 to 3% had minimal impact on profit improvement, resulting in a contraction of 1.8% in Q1 operating profit. 신세벽, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk-yeol and his visiting Angolan counterpart João Lourenço signed 4 memorandums of understanding on this Tuesday at the Yongsan presidential office. The planned partnership covers a broad range of diverse arenas, including shipbuilding and energy, as well as public health and law enforcement. President Yoon made note of the potential advances in collaboration on renewable energy, given Angola's rich resources, while President Lourenço spoke of seeking to learn from Korea's rapid economic growth. He also highlighted Korea's efforts to expand ties with Africa amid the upcoming Korea-Africa summit this June. Meanwhile, in talks that lasted over 2 hours Monday afternoon, President Yoon Suk-yeol and main opposition party leader Lee Jae-myung reaffirmed their broad divide over a host of domestic issues, but agreed to hold more meetings. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
President Yoon Suk-yeol and main opposition leader Lee Jae-myung reconfirmed their differences over policy and state affairs, while also agreeing to continue their discussions. Yoon and Lee on Monday held their first official meeting since the president took office, following the ruling party's defeat in the April 10th general election, where Lee's opposition Democratic Party of Korea won a sweeping majority. With Yoon having offered to listen to all the opposition leader had to say, their tea time lasted 2 hours and 15 minutes, beginning with Lee's list of demands for political concessions. First, stressing the need to improve people's livelihoods, Lee asked Yoon to accept the DP's proposal of a 250,000 won handout, or roughly $182 to all Korean citizens, as well as the passing of a special bill to compensate victims of rental fraud. Yoon said livelihood support should be more focused on helping those in most immediate need, but the government will consult the opposition on additional measures. Another key issue or demand raised by Lee was to accept a special council probe into the death of a Marine last year, and a special act to look into the Itaewon disaster, where 159 people lost their lives as a result of a crowd crush. The DP attempted to put these bills through the National Assembly, only to have Yoon veto them, along with a special council probe into allegations of stock manipulation involving First Lady Kim Gon-hee. Lee appeared to allude to the bill, saying concerns surrounding family members should be cleared up, before asking the president to express his regret for exercising his veto on such bills. According to the top office, other than the Itaewon Act, the special bills were not discussed further. Yoon Senior Press Secretary Lee Do-won told reporters that to narrow their differences in approach to policy, the president suggested a bipartisan consultation body, while Lee indicated he prefers to keep negotiations within the existing framework of the National Assembly. The DP later announced it was disappointed by the meeting, as it sensed no pivot towards its demands for change. Still, the two managed to agree on the need to reform the medical system, with the opposition leader saying it is necessary to expand medical school admissions. He also said the DP will cooperate on the government's pension reform. While there was no joint statement between the two sides, Yoon and Lee agreed to continue meeting in the future in various formats as needed. Yoon has become the first president in South Korea's modern political history to serve his entire term with an opposition-led parliament.
More than anything, it is significant that the president and the opposition leader held talks for 2 hours and 15 minutes on people's livelihoods and state affairs. The meeting is seen by the top office as the first step in reaching out to the opposition.
It is too early to read the tea leaves, but the presidential office says it hopes the first tea meeting will lead to continued communication and cooperation. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
In yet another display of open hostility, Pyongyang has planted landmines on all roads connecting the two Koreas. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung reports.
North Korea appears to have installed mines on all 3 roads connecting the two Koreas. According to a South Korean military official on Monday, the North laid landmines on the road inside the demilitarized zone late last year, near Arrowhead Hill in Cheoron, Gangwon-do Province. This road was created under the September 19th Inter-Korean Military Agreement signed in 2018 to combine efforts to excavate the remains of soldiers killed during the Korean War. However, after scrapping the 2018 agreement last November, Pyongyang has been taking action to ramp up its military measures.
At the end of last year, North Korea declared the complete abolishment of the September 19th military agreement and took steps to restore military measures. Accordingly, our military is taking necessary measures.
The regime has now installed mines on all roads between the two Koreas, which had once symbolized reconciliation and cooperation. In January, they were installed on the Gyeonggi and Donghae roads. The North also removed numerous streetlights. North Korea has also been spotted rebuilding its guard posts within the DMZ, which had been destroyed under the 2018 pact. After declaring the inter-Korean relations as that of 2 hostile states, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in January called for strict measures to block all channels of communication along the border. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The monitoring of UN sanctions against North Korea over its nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles ambitions ends on this Tuesday. Since its creation in 2009, the so-called panel of experts played a crucial part in seeking to enforce Security Council resolutions against North Korea. The 8-member panel also shared related reports twice a year, keeping the international community informed about the regime's activities. But back in March, Russia vetoed renewing the mandate of the monitoring panel, effectively ending its 15 years of operation. Meanwhile, UN sanctions monitors say remains from a rocket that struck the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv in early January was from a North Korean Hwasong-11 series ballistic missile. The finding was shared in a lengthy report that added the monitors, however, were not able to verify who and from where the missile was launched. Information provided by Ukrainian authorities has suggested the missile was fired from Russian territory. Both North Korea and Russia have denied international accusations of bilateral weapons trade for use against Ukraine. Pro-Palestinian protests continue at college campuses in the U.S. despite efforts by authorities there to crack down on the rampant rallies, which are also now taking place at French universities. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
2 p.m. Monday, That was the deadline given to the pro-Palestinian protesters who had set up an encampment at Columbia University in New York to protest against the dire humanitarian crisis in the Middle East and call for the university's divestment from companies with links to the Israeli occupation of Gaza. Despite threats of suspension, 80 tents and dozens of protesters remained in the encampment just after the 2 p.m. deadline. The school says only the students who remain in the encampment after the deadline would face immediate suspension, and not the hundreds of other students who have encircled the camp to protect the protesters while showing their support. The Columbia protests have inspired similar pro-Palestinian demonstrations on campuses across the country, which have led to hundreds of arrests. 6 protesters were arrested at the University of Texas at Austin on Monday, with dozens of police officers and state troopers at the scene. Around 100 protesters were arrested at Boston's Northeastern University over the weekend after police in riot gear cleared an encampment at the school. Protesters at Yale University were seen setting up a new encampment Sunday afternoon after police arrested nearly 50 protesters and cleared a camp. While protesters were warned of suspension and possible arrest, no deadline to leave the encampment was set. Similar protests were also seen at universities in France, including at Sorbonne University in Paris on Monday, where police moved in on dozens of protesters who had camped out in a courtyard in the university to demand an end to Israel's bombardment of Gaza. It follows another massive protest that broke out at the Sciences Po University in Paris last week. According to an official on Monday, funding for Sciences Po would be suspended until calm and security have been restored. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, here in Korea, a center dedicated to promoting the Korean martial art of Taekwondo is celebrating its 10th birthday this year. Our Choi Soo-young was at the celebration.
A decade of the ready stance. A leap forward for the next 100 years. On Monday, the Taekwondo Promotion Foundation celebrated the 10th anniversary of its main center, the Taekwondowon, at the T1 Stadium in Muju, Jeollabuk-do Province in South Korea. Taekwondo is a traditional Korean martial art involving punching and kicking techniques. And over the past 10 years, the Taekwondowon has played a central role in promoting the traditional sport to the world. It has welcomed over 2.5 million visitors, with around 20,000 foreigners visiting each year for training in Taekwondo.
The Taekwondo Center was created through the strong desires of many Taekwondo practitioners. We run Taekwondo classes in 40 countries overseas and also provide various equipment to developing countries. We also support volunteer groups of university students to actively promote Taekwondo in developing countries.
A senior master in Germany who had contributed to the globalization of Taekwondo by actively engaging for nearly 40 years also came to celebrate.
In the past, we introduced Taekwondo by doing demonstrations on the streets. Then we started visiting elementary schools in Germany, gathering kids and teaching them. Things have changed a lot now.
The ceremony started with a marvelous performance by the Taekwondo demonstration team from Jeonju University. Especially noteworthy was the straight punch event performed by 16 representatives who established the Taekwondowon 10 years ago. Minister of Culture, Sports and Tourism, Yoo In-chun said the government will support making the center the hub of Taekwondo, enabling it to accurately spread the essence of Taekwondo.
Many people around the world who love Taekwondo, I hope they visit the Taekwondowon in Muju at least once in their lifetime. I would be grateful if they experience the pure spirit of Taekwondo and then go back to their own countries and spread Taekwondo there.
September 4th is Taekwondo Day in South Korea. The Taekwondo Promotion Foundation plans to hold a grand ceremony that day to commemorate the 30th anniversary of Taekwondo being adopted as an official Olympic sport in 1994. Choi Soo-young, Arirang News, Muju.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. In Kenya, flash floods and a landslide on Monday killed at least 45 and injured over 110 others in and around the villages near the town of Mai Mahiu, not far from the country's capital, Nairobi. According to the Kenya Red Cross, 109 have been hospitalized, while 49 others were reported missing. Among the deaths, the Kenyan police commander said 17 of the recovered bodies were of children. The Kenyan police initially announced that the landslide and flash floods were caused by the collapse of the old Kijabi Dam. However, the Nakuru County said in a statement late Monday that the burst of water mass in a clogged river tunnel under the railway caused the floods. Heavy rains and flooding in Kenya since last month have killed over 140 people so far, with more than 185,000 residents displaced. Moving over to the United Kingdom, where Scotland's First Minister Humza Yousaf announced his resignation on Monday after his decision to abruptly end a power-sharing agreement between his Scottish National Party and the Green Party. The decision, coming just days after saying he had no plans to do so, angered the Green Party, and with calls for a no-confidence vote and no alternative for forming a coalition, Yousaf was under pressure to quit before being forced out. The SNP and the Greens have disagreed over climate change and gender identity issues, including Yousaf's plan to scrap Scotland's carbon emissions reduction goal. The search for a new First Minister has begun with the SNP's John Swinney and Kate Forbes as likely contenders. Yousaf became the first Muslim leader of a major UK political party after he succeeded Nicola Sturgeon 13 months ago. Iraq passed a law on Saturday that would impose heavy prison sentences and fines on gay and transgender people. The law, which was passed quietly as an amendment to an anti-prostitution law, imposes a jail sentence of 10 to 15 years for homosexual relations and 1 to 3 years for people who perform or undergo gender transition surgeries. The new law also bans any organization that promotes sexual deviancy, with a prison sentence of at least 7 years and a minimum fine of around $7,600. A previous draft version of the law that wasn't passed included allowing the death sentence for same-sex relations. The Iraqi parliament's acting speaker, Mohsen al-Mandalawi, said that the vote was a necessary step to protect the value structure of society and that the legislation can protect children from calls for moral depravity and homosexuality. The Rolling Stones, an iconic English rock band that's been active for almost 70 years, kicked off their North America tour in Houston on Sunday. The band, which formed in 1962, stars some of the eldest surviving rock stars, including 80-year-olds Mick Jagger and Keith Richards and 76-year-old Ronnie Wood. The tour began with a performance of the 1981 classic Start Me Up, with frontman Mick Jagger dancing and skipping across the stage and showcasing his vocal range. The Houston performance was the first of 16 shows confirmed across the US and Canada through July. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. The last day of April is wrapping up on a pleasant spring note. Highs are slightly lower than yesterday, but still hovering above norms. That May 1st will start out with wide temperature differences tomorrow. Mostly sunny skies shine down on central parts of the country, but southern regions and the east coast could see 5 to 10 millimeters of rainfall. Then Gyeongsangdo and east of Jeollanam-do province will see passing rain during the day today. So grab a small umbrella in case of rain. Despite cloudy skies, the southern provinces are seeing a big jump in highs. Daegu to see a high of 25 degrees Celsius this afternoon, which is 9 degrees higher than yesterday. Gyeongju topping out at 24 degrees. Rain on Jeju, meanwhile, could continue into tomorrow afternoon. Starting off hot and sunny on Children's Day weekend, then nationwide rain is in the forecast on Sunday afternoon, lingering into Monday with a drop in highs. So please plan accordingly for your long weekend. With that in mind, let's take a look at the international weather conditions.
And those are the headlines at this hour. Thank you for watching, but do stay tuned for yet another edition of Issues and Insiders coming up next.
A site where the Republic of Korea's past, present, and future coexist. Encounter all those times at the Independence Hall of Korea.
Thinking and I close my eyes, everything is black and white. I can't tell if we're getting closer. Running up against the tide, I could go my whole life playing this thing just over and over.
The center of the Republic of Korea's history and culture. The Independence Hall of Korea.
장에 가면 참 행복해요. 우리 그런 고유한 그런 정서, 인정, 뭐라도 정말 콩 한 쪽이라도 이렇게 녹아 먹고 싶어하는 그런 사람들 마음이 다 보여요, 장에 가면. 저는 대한민국 작돌뱅이 사진가 정영심입니다.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
President Yoon Suk-yeol and main opposition Democratic Party leader Lee Jae-myung met for talks over tea at the Yongsan presidential office Monday afternoon. So what are some of the major takeaways, according to foreign correspondents? And what are the implications of Korea's stronger than expected economic growth in the first quarter? Meanwhile, on the regional security front, what is the disruptive technology protection network? Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min San-hee. Today we have our panel of foreign correspondents and their take on regional headlines. For this, I have Melanie Jensen here in the studio. Melanie, it's good to have you back.
It's good to be here.
I also have Nicholas Roca with us. Nicholas, as always, welcome.
Good to be on the show.
Right, Melanie, let's begin with a few domestic headlines here in the country. President Yoon Suk-yeol and opposition party leader Lee Jae-myung met at the presidential office Monday afternoon. Amid the country's deep partisan divide, what was your takeaway from this meeting?
Well, I think it was not really a good meeting, even though it lasted for more than 2 hours. The two leaders couldn't really agree on anything except for the fact that we need more medical students. But apart from that, it seems like they were talking for 2 hours without really reaching any agreements. They didn't really make any kind of statements. The Democratic Party afterwards expressed that they were very disappointed over the meeting, especially because it was President Yoon himself who had called Lee Jae-myung after he suffered a pretty big defeat in the parliament election in the beginning of April. So he had been calling Lee Jae-myung asking if they could discuss political disagreements. But despite Yoon being the one making the phone call, he didn't really bring anything new to the table. It seemed like he hadn't really changed his standpoint on his political matters. So all in all, it turned out to be a very disappointing meeting, and that is also what what editors and Korean news media has been expressing afterwards. I read one comment saying, why did Yoon even show up? Why did he even have this meeting? Why did he bother when nothing has come out of it?
And what are your thoughts regarding the meeting, Nicholas?
Well, I tend to agree with Melanie. I feel like both of them stayed on their position, stood their ground. I mean, also probably I didn't expect much of it. We knew that Lee Jae-myung was going to push forward its agenda for a cash handout, for instance, to relieve the current inflation. We don't expect Yoon Suk-yeol to change his foreign affairs policy, even though, of course, Lee Jae-myung pushed towards the agenda of maybe, you know, the historical disagreement between Seoul and Tokyo. So yeah, I didn't expect much, and for now not much came of it. But I think the big question now is, will anything happen at the National Assembly? Will the opposition and the People Power Party be able to, you know, find agreement on some specific laws? And that we will need to find out in the coming weeks.
Right, and I guess that backdrop, we're hoping that they will reach a broad agreement on the idea of bolstering the economy, of course. And speaking about the economy, Nicholas, Korea noted a stronger than expected first quarter economic growth. Could you tell us more about this finding, its broader implications?
Yeah, it was quite surprising, but the GDP growth for the first quarter was at 1.3, and the initial expectation by the government was 0.6. So it's way higher than expected. Pretty good results. It's always nice to have good figures, but there's a more general question, that is, where does this growth come from? Of course, it's South Korea, so it comes from exports mainly, big company, key products, semiconductors, batteries, but also some high consumption for this first quarter, also boosted by the fact that there was a lot of travel, so a lot of people came into Korea. But my question is, will those good figures be enough, to make the South Korean population happy about the actual economic situation in South Korea right now? We know inflation is really high, and the public sentiment probably won't change with those figures, because inflation will probably stay high, and I think we need to be cautious, because those are quarterly results. They are indeed good, but we measure an economic policy on the long term, of course. And right now, the government is, as Marlene explained, kind of hand-tied. There's not a lot of expectation that it will be able to push towards its economic agenda. So yeah, I think it's good news. It's always better to have those good results, but we need to be cautious and to wait until the end of the year to see if this economic growth is sustainable in the long run.
Right, indeed. And Melanie, on the diplomatic front then, delegates from Seoul, Tokyo and Washington sat down in the US, I believe, last week for the inaugural meeting of the Disruptive Technology Protection Network. For the sake of our viewers who may not be familiar with this network, could you tell us a bit about it?
Yes, it is a network that consists of Japan, the US and South Korea, and it is regarding disruptive technology, which means technology that has a big impact on the national economy. That could be, for example, semiconductors or biotechnology or artificial intelligence, for example. This summit was held because the US has expressed concern about this export from Korea and Japan of microchips to China. So the United States would like Japan and Korea to take more care and to protect their technology more against, well, mainly China, Russia and Iran, as was mentioned on the summit. Actually, the US diplomats attending the summit, they held a quite interesting speech where they directly mentioned the threat of China, of Russia and of Iran. They expressed concern of what they called was China-backed cyber hackers that was trying to frame or trying to make fake news about important international politicians and big business leaders. So after the summit, there was an agreement that Korea and Japan and United States would be better at cooperating with their boosting their export to each other's countries of these microchips and disruptive technology as a whole, and also that they would be better at protecting the technology and keeping it within more Western-minded, more democratic countries.
Right. Nicholas, also last week, defense authorities from the three countries, that would be Korea, South Korea, Japan and the US, held their 14th defense trilateral talks, virtually that is. Could you tell us a bit about what was discussed?
Yes, Sunny, what we seen is the continuity of the Camp David Declaration of August 2023, trilateral cooperation being enhanced in the defense sector, with the idea behind that those regular meetings and this cooperation has to be institutionalized so that it won't suffer from any change of power either in Washington, Tokyo or here in Seoul. What I saw was noteworthy is in the joint declaration, joint statement, was progress towards an annual named trilateral exercise, and that is an example of institutionalizing this relationship. Through the joint statement, it seems like this cooperation is also an answer to different actors. The first of them is of course China. China is not mentioned directly, but we can understand that, of course, it's one of the actors that the three countries are trying to answer. There's hints with the, of course, notorious peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits. There's also mention of the respect of the Convention of the Law of the Sea. We know that there's been an overwhelming Chinese presence in the South China Sea, close to the Philippines economic zone. Of course, Russia is also mentioned. Its war in Ukraine. And also its relationship to North Korea, and this defense cooperation is really aiming at answering North Korean action, North Korean military actions. It's been mentioned, DPRK is mentioned 10 times in the joint statement, and the idea is still the same. Answer to North Korean missile tests, answer to its arm delivery to Russia, of course, to its evasion of sanctions, the project of a North Korean satellite. And what is interesting is that this trilateral cooperation is perhaps maybe the last place where there's a will to act on the DPRK action, because we've seen now that the United Nations Security Council is kind of void when it comes to DPRK. Nor China or Russia is really willing to apply those sanctions. It's clearly helping North Korea evade those sanctions quite blatantly, even for Russia. So if those countries want to pursue this policy of sanctions towards North Korea, it's going to be together. So I think that's what we need to look forward in the coming months.
Right. And in related news, Melania, North Korea, for its part, it has condemned regional efforts that would include efforts by the US, South Korea and Japan to maintain monitoring of UN sanctions against it. What exactly did North Korea say?
Well, Pyongyang quite bluntly stated that the more sanctions that would come towards Pyongyang, the more developed they would continue their nuclear weapon programs, the more ballistic missiles they would fire, the more nuclear tests they would perform. And this is obviously because North Korea feels extremely threatened around these tightened relationships between Japan and South Korea and the United States, particularly the military drills that South Korea and the United States are currently performing seems like a very big provocation to the North Korean regime. So we have seen since the pandemic ended, we have seen that Kim Jong-un has fired more and more missiles, done more and more tests, trying to push the limit to what he can do without provocating the West too much and without provocating South Korea too much. So all of this is part of the rising tensions we see between particularly South Korea and North Korea, also after North Korea stopped having their unification policy.
Right. And talking about North Korea's testings, Nicholas, the regime last week tested a rocket launcher system that pundits claim can target capital Seoul. Could you tell us a bit about this latest weapons testing?
Well, this latest testing happened on Thursday. There was this rocket test that you mentioned, but also a declaration of Kim Jong-un asking a national defense industrial company to fulfill its annual production plans. It's another hint that, yes, North Korea is producing more weapons for itself, but also producing more weapons probably to send to Russia, because the weapons that you mentioned that have been tested, it's 240 millimeter rocket shells, and we found those kind of weapon also in Ukraine. So it's part of those two factors. This weapon probably can put Seoul and Greater Seoul under threat, but as a lot of different weapons. Now we've noticed DPRK has various capacities. There's the short-range ballistic missiles that can put Seoul under reach. There's also cruise missiles, submarine launch ballistic missiles. There's a like impressive variety of weapons at Pyongyang's disposal now. What we've also seen last week was the so-called nuclear trigger counterattack exercises that Kim Jong-un oversaw. Basically, it's a presentation of how the DPRK would answer to an immediate threat on the country, on the regime. It's using larger shells, 600 millimeter shells. Some pundits, some experts, notably Ankit Panda on NK News, mentioned that this type of counterattack necessitates for North Korea to spread the rocket launchers throughout the territory for it to be efficient. So that's probably a sign we will need to focus on the coming coming weeks. But as a whole, I think what we've seen from the DPRK is really, as Manin mentioned, a focus towards weapons that are aiming to answer a localized conflict around the peninsula. If we think about what happened during the pandemic, we saw a lot of ICBMs, a lot of weapons, that could flow over Japan, that could target basically the mainland United States. And now recently it's been weapons that could maybe target the island of Guam, Japan, South Korea, but very localized use of weapons. And that goes with this declaration of the end of the unification policy, with South Korea being the main target. That being said, if we think of what happened at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, we saw tension would rise dramatically because the start of the year was incredibly tense with those shelling near Yeonpyeong Island in the west. And in the end, we've seen, yes, some military action from the DPRK, but not as much as expected. This could change, of course. We could see, tomorrow an ICBM test over Japan, or a new type of missile test and a more direct provocation. But it seems that DPRK now is quite content with the situations as it is going. I mean, it evades sanctions. Its economic relationship with Russia is blooming. I think now the country is in a better position as it was prior to the pandemic, despite, of course, the incredible economic hit that the pandemic represented. So, yes, I think a lot of things changed in North Korea, and there's a lot of questions that are unanswered.
Right, indeed. And against this backdrop, Melanie, come May, that would be next month, Seoul may host a trilateral summit with Tokyo and Beijing. Do you believe that this issue, perhaps, that is regarding North Korea, could see some tangible progress during this upcoming trilateral summit?
I think it might be too much to hope for, to be honest, because lately the Korean and Chinese relationship has really gotten down. So I think that this trilateral meeting might presumably more be about improving the Korean and Chinese relationships, and not the least the issue over Taiwan. Recently, both Japan and South Korea has been turning more towards the United States and away from their big brother China. And there has been a lot of issues about particularly Taiwan. And I think that might overshadow the North Korean issue more. So I think what we might be able to hope for in this trilateral meeting will be that Korea and China might improve their relationships a little bit, might become better at talking about the issues that there is in the region, more than particularly make any kind of big breakthrough regarding North Korea. Of course, North Korea will also be on the agenda. However, I doubt that there will be any kind of conclusion or any kind of actually effective initiative that might make the situation easier in the region.
Right, which is why, Nicholas, some pundits say that the upcoming trilateral summit among the leaders of Seoul, Tokyo and Beijing should focus their talks more on economic concerns among the three countries rather than security. How do you respond?
Well, I tend to agree with Manin that there's a very slight hope to see progress on the defense sector. I think the positions are the way they are, and there's not a lot that can be done. On the economic side, of course, there's a necessity for communications. The economy are very linked. And we know also, we've seen on the South Korean side that even if there is an answer to the United States asking to decouple with China in some very sensitive sectors, some South Korean companies are actually in China, need to stay in China to, to continue their activity. So I think, yeah, if there's an area of progress for both sides, it is going to be definitely the economic sector, and I have very little hope for major progress, major breakthrough either on Taiwan or on the DPRK issue.
Right. And speaking about summits, Nicholas, Russia's Vladimir Putin is poised to visit Beijing in May as well to mark his first diplomatic agenda after winning a fifth term
in office. What is the relevance of this upcoming event, and what do you believe are its broader implications?
Well, it's pretty significant. It's going to be Vladimir Putin's first visit abroad since he's been elected, and he announced himself last week actually that he would go. Sergei Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, was in Beijing earlier this April. We know that Xi Jinping and Putin are really close. They met more than 40 times, and the broader question I think will be how much China is going to show support towards the Russian war in Ukraine. We know that when Antony Blinken was in Beijing just a few days ago, he mentioned that China has been providing armed parts, weapons parts to Russia, and China has been, of course, yes, showing support to Russia, but also trying to stay in between Russia and the West in a way. And we'll see, will Xi Jinping push even further? Will he show, complete support towards this war that has been doing for quite some time now? There's also the question of the DPRK. We know Pyongyang has been very close to Pyongyang. There's this, Kim Jong-un putting bromance. How does Xi Jinping perceive this? How does China like this or not? We could try to see if there anything comes out on that matter. And what I would look at also if there's an increase in economic partnership. The Russian-Chinese trade has been over $200 billion this year. It's a big improvement. So we'll see where it goes.
Again, more questions and very few answers for now then. All right, Nicholas, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Melanie, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for today. We return same time tomorrow with talks on Korea's labor environment. Thank you for watching.
A site where the Republic of Korea's past, present, and future coexist. Encounter all those times at the Independence Hall.